Australian Aviation Podcast, the official podcast of Australian Aviation, unpacking the latest insights, developments and issues impacting Australia's aviation sector.
Hello everybody, my name is Adam Thorne and welcome to the Australian Aviation Podcast. Now, when we started the show, the original premise of this was like market intelligence, like having a debate about the big news stories. The idea was to give you some insight to help further your career in the industry. It's obviously that's not happened for a long time. It's essentially just turned into be a total drivel. So what's happened, the kind of powers that be at the company have decided we need to kind of lean into the nonsense. We need to make it like a kind of even more ridiculous. And so shortly before coming on air, I was told by Damon, we've yet to give him a proper nickname.
Yeah, he's the terrible Damon.
But he's a terrible Damon.
He came to us from hell in a burst of fire and brimstone.
This is what you mean about it being ridiculous. He said what we need is more viral moments. This is because they're putting all of these videos on social media now. And the video that Jake did where you did the kind of the voice of the kind of old footage talking about Qantas international flying, could you just do a very quick, very short of that voice so people know what you're talking about?
Do you mean the one where I spoke about Qantas having 90 years of international flying?
That would do, yeah. So basically what they want is more of this kind of drivel. So I've brought back Soot, our air services rescue dog. I've actually needed him today because it's been a very stressful day. So I've brought him back. We can have a viral moment. I should probably introduce Jake properly. Jake, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Adam. Good to be here.
Yeah, excellent. So obviously we're going to try and incorporate some sort of, viral moments if we can. I will try and keep a semblance of professionalism in this circus. We usually start off with shout outs, Jake, announcements, all that kind of thing. Have we got any shout outs this week?
Yeah, well, one of our listeners, we mentioned the other week, I said that there ain't no rule says a dog can't fly a plane.
And this was possibly because Sit was here.
Quite possibly.
Hello, waving.
And one of our readers, Richard, has sent us an email saying that, in fact, people have trained dogs to fly a plane.
I don't believe that's nonsense. There's no way a dog has been to space or is in any way been at the controls of a rocket.
Dogs have been to space.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, no, yeah, maybe, yeah, just to like as passengers, but not like as astronauts. They weren't given like a role on the crew.
Yeah, well, I mean, they shot, the Russians shot Laika into space.
Laika.
But anyway, Laika, the space dog.
Wasn't he a space monkey? I thought it was a space monkey.
Yes, there were space monkeys, but Laika was the dog.
Right, okay.
Anyway, apparently, like almost 10 years ago now, Sky over in the UK did a series called Dogs Might Fly.
Right.
Where they tried to train 12 unwanted and abandoned dogs from across the UK to become the first dog ever to fly a plane.
What, so the dog would actually
take
full
full control.
And they trained this.
Yes.
Now, I used to thought the UK was working at a far higher level on most things in Australia. Questions need to be asked about the safety authorities in the UK for apparently signing this off. Did you do something? So you identified, didn't he, that what this show was?
It was called Dogs Might Fly.
Right.
I looked, near as I can tell, according to this guy, Matthew Ward, who was I think a dog trainer on the show. Episode 6, which was the final episode, 2 of the 3 rescue dogs I was responsible for made it through to flight school, and I was proud to have designed the core aspects of the training program equipment, which ultimately saw Shadow, Alfie, and Reggie all earn their wings by taking full control of a Cessna 172 aircraft.
No, that never happened. That is nonsense. There is no way you were telling me that a dog flew an aircraft. In fact, 3 of them, not just any of them, they were like rescue dogs. They had a hard life. Maybe they had a point to prove. I don't know. There is no way that happened. There's no way that happened. Have you seen any video of this?
There is a video. It's on Vimeo.
It didn't happen.
There's a video here on Vimeo. There was a full series that they've got a dog in I guess a little apparatus here.
This is ridiculous.
On this video that's driving around on the ground.
Right. Yeah, on the ground I can see.
Behind a joystick on the ground. And if you can see here, so they've got this is up in the plane, the Cessna 172, and there's
God. This is ridiculous.
They let dogs fly a plane.
Oh my God. It's actually this is ridiculous. This is ridiculous. You can't. Well, I'll see if they can embed this in it. This is the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen. It's ridiculous.
So apparently, yes, they have taught dogs to fly planes. Not an advisable thing to do. But Richard says, keep up the top-class nonsense and ridiculous puns. I do enjoy them.
Certainly doing that. I could only imagine what the discussion was at the kind of creative meeting at Sky, where they're like, what shows are we going to make? And someone's got, what would be really funny? Can dogs fly? How much would they have been drinking and drugs would have been involved in coming up with that idea?
Well, apparently
someone commissioned it as well.
There was like a bunch of challenges that the dogs had to go through.
So it wasn't just enough that they could fly the plane. They're making them do like aerobatic displays.
There was like it's not aerobatic. It's not aerobatics
it's
or anything. They found a bunch of the dogs, right, and they put them through. They winnowed the 12 down to 3 by putting them through. They wanted to test the dogs' the cognitive abilities, emotional stability, and memory. So there was they made the dogs do a mini movie, a music video, and a theatre production.
So they also had them being like directors as well.
Presumably they were in the play,
right?
And in the music video,
right.
Yeah. There's like photos of the dogs on stage in the music video.
I just don't believe this happened. Can we track down, as a matter of urgency, like whoever was involved in this TV show and interview them and something? Because I just don't think this actually ever happened.
Well, there's contact information here for Matthew Ward. So he's over in the UK. I guess we can drop him an email, but apparently that did happen. Apparently back in 2016 or so, they did teach dogs how to fly a plane.
It's absurd. Yeah, no, we need to do some more digging on this. I just don't believe, I think it's a magic of TV or they just lied. I can't actually believe that happened. Right, what are we talking about next? It's nonsense.
A brief update, by the way. You remember last week we were talking about Trump's wonderful new plane that he's getting from Qatar.
Yeah, good on him.
The Qatari government is bestowing this gift of a plane, of a 747-8 on the president. Turns out the word is less, the more appropriate word is less bestow and more foist.
Yeah.
Because from what I can gather, there was an article on Forbes that basically said that the Qatar government has been trying to flog this thing for like 5 years.
Right.
They've been trying to sell the plane for ages, and they haven't been able to sell the plane because it just costs so much to store and maintain the damn thing. And so what we're basically gathering now is that essentially the Qatar government is looking to offload this thing on Donald Trump because they knew he'd take it because he's a toddler who wants a big shiny thing.
Well, I don't understand what your problem is. So basically they're like, we've got a spare aircraft going, we got nowhere to put it, and Trump's like, we really need an aircraft. Surely that's just a sensible decision for all involved. I don't know what your problem is.
Well, no, because the thing is a giant sucking money pit, Adam.
Right.
It costs so much to store and maintain, and the costs of refitting this thing, because you'd have to, in order to avoid, national security issues like the plane being bugged, for example, which would be a concern, in order to avoid all these national security concerns, you'd have to strip this thing down to the rivets and completely refit it and make sure, because there's a lot of equipment and security stuff that needs to go on these planes to make it suitable for Air Force One. And so you'd have to rip everything out of the plane and put it all back and refit it to proper standards. And that would be horrendously expensive and would not be complete by the time Trump left office. And so, it's kind of at that point, unless Trump wants to issue a waiver saying, no, I want this plane now and I don't care how many bugs might be in it. You might as well just go with the ones that Boeing was already making.
Right. Let's move on from Trump because he gets you very passionate, and we'll go on all sorts of tangents.
I just wanted to give that quick update on that plane because it's a ridiculous saga.
Yeah, okay. Right, what's next? You got any other shout-outs, announcements?
Look, a shout-out to, and we'll be touching on this a bit later in the show, but a shout-out to the lovely people at Air New Zealand, who were kind enough to invite myself and Paddy, one of our videographers and producers, over to Auckland to be on the inaugural flight of their refitted 787 Dreamliner.
So this is the first time anyone's refitted a Dreamliner? Because
from nose to tail.
Yeah.
And we'll be showing you our exclusive interview with Greg Foran, the CEO of Air New Zealand, a bit later in the show. But I just wanted to thank them for giving us that opportunity. It was great to be on the inaugural flight, and we got to learn a lot about the plane, how it got to be refitted, and where Air New Zealand is at right now.
Excellent. Yes, and we will probably show that. We'll do an introduction later. I think after the first ad break, we're going to slot this in. So you had like 15 minutes with the CEO, Greg Foran. He's a fascinating person to speak to because he took over just as COVID was starting, and he didn't previously have kind of high-level aviation experience. So he was thrown in the deepest of deep ends. He has resigned, or he's kind of seeing out his kind of contract. So he's an outgoing CEO as well, which means you can be a little bit more candid. He's got a kind of extraordinary story to tell, which I know you touched on with that. Have we got any more shout-outs?
Should probably mention the Aviation Awards.
Yes, we should do. The Australian Aviation Awards are coming up very soon. You have a number of days left to enter. Go on Google Australian Aviation Awards. It will take you to the exact site. So there's two options. You can either submit an application yourself, or you can nominate somebody else. And what this basically means is they get an email kind of giving them a nudge to get involved. We've got categories for individuals. We've got categories for companies. Whatever you do in the industry, there is a way to get involved. Go on there, have a look. Even if you don't get nominated, you can still come along to the event itself. It's a really good opportunity to network. Obviously, an industry that's very, very spread out. We're having it, I think it's at Illumina, which is the swanky new venue at Martin's Place in Sydney. Come along, get involved, enter. You've still got time. If you've got any questions about getting involved and entering, you can email me, adam.thorne@momentummedia.com.au, and I will try and put you in touch with a person that can help out.
And on a personal note, from me, a shout out to the wonderful Bristol-based shanty band known as the Longest Johns for being kind enough to schedule their concert in Sydney on my birthday.
Yeah,
it's it was a very thoughtful thing for them to do. And it was a very nice concert.
Yeah, apparently, Sue was saying earlier, it was quite raucous. Like people
yes,
were
well, it was a standing venue, and you have not seen anyone a room full of people get so excited about the traditional English folk song "Oak and Ash and Thorn."
Right. Well, it's a great name. Great name. What was the kind of audience of this? Like, was there like a demographic we can boil it down? Obviously, sea shanty lovers or lovers or whatever.
Yeah, it's lots of different people.
Yeah.
There were kids there. There were very old people there.
Yeah.
And everyone was there because they love the Longest Johns and love shanties. It was people were on their feet, because it was a standing venue, but on their feet, singing along, stomping and clapping and jumping up and down. It was almost like a rock concert, really.
So I mean, the Longest Johns are like the Taylor Swift of the sea shanty world. They're like the top sea shanty band.
They're up there. They're up there. They're well up there.
Okay, nice.
Certainly, there are no Johns longer than they are.
No.
But thank you to Andy, JD, and Robbie of the Longest Johns for as well sticking around for ages after the show to meet and greet the fans. They did not have to do that.
No.
By the time we left at like 11 o'clock, the line was still really, really long, and so those poor guys were probably there, midnight if not later. So it was really nice of them to do that and not charge for it either.
Yeah, okay, nice. Right, we got any more shout outs? We get into the end of the show.
That's probably about it.
Okay, so what we're going to do now, we're going to go for a break. And when we come back after the break, you're going to hear from Jake Nelson interviewing Greg Foran, the CEO of Air New Zealand. God willing, that will work. We'll be back after the break.
Take it away, me.
Hello, welcome to the Australian Aviation Podcast. We are here on location at Auckland Airport. I am Jake Nelson speaking to the CEO of Air New Zealand, Greg Foran, because this is a very special occasion for Air New Zealand, the launch of its first retrofitted Dreamliner, the inaugural flight to Brisbane. Greg, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Pleased to be here.
So, Greg, can you start off by giving us a bit of an overview of this Dreamliner retrofit and the journey that it took to get here? Because it was a little bit of an arduous one, wasn't it?
Yeah, look, it's been about 7 to 8 years in the making. So this really got underway sort of 2017, 2018. The business at that point had a product that had been on board for the best part of, at that stage, almost 20 years. So time for a change. And of course, no sooner had the design work begun than COVID occurred. And so that put a bit of a halt on things, but come about 22, we got things going again in earnest, and here we are today, literally 30 minutes away or so from boarding and getting on NZH, and it'll be the first of 14 that we'll do in the next 2 years.
Can you give us a sense of what changes have been made to the interior?
Yeah, basically everything has effectively been ripped out and either sort of refurbished and cleaned and put back in, or in the case of seats and IFE, all of that is new product. So pretty extensive. I was up in Singapore. We got the retrofit done at SASCO, who've been an incredible partner and have seen the interior of this plane basically stripped bare. And then either products have been, cleaned up and retrofitted back in, or, as I said, in the case of all the seats and all the IFE, brand new product. And in fact, product that we don't have on any of our planes. And that's been one of the challenges, of course, is to get that new product approved through all the regulatory processes on a retrofit, which is not normal. Normally you would do that on a brand new plane on a production line.
And how similar is this to the process of getting a new plane, an entirely new plane fitted out?
Yeah, it's got a few more twists and takes in it. And as I said, normally what you'd do is you'd be, chatting with Boeing. You'd be in South Carolina at their plant. The product would be getting approved there and put onto a new plane as it goes through a production line. In this particular case, this is all brand new product. It's had to be done up in Singapore. We've had to deal with regulators, getting involved with Boeing. We've had a third party called NAT who have done a fantastic job. And so this sort of tripartite arrangement of Air New Zealand, NAT, Boeing, then working closely with the regulators, in some cases in America and Europe, to get it all signed off. And the end result of that is where we're at today, but it's been about 180 days to get the first one done. And I'd like to think the second one, which is underway right at the moment, we should be able to do in about 40, 45 days.
Learning from the first one.
Absolutely. We don't have to go through the regulatory process again, but we are still, as most people are, working hard on the supply chain, making sure you've got seats, making sure you've got galleys, making sure you've got in-flight entertainment, all those things.
Now, I want to talk for a moment about you, because you are leaving Air New Zealand soon, and you came in to Air New Zealand right after the start of COVID. Can you give us a sense of what that was like in your early days, getting your feet under the desk and suddenly the greatest crisis to hit aviation in probably its history?
Yeah, interesting is I guess the word, and I've learnt, and I've spoken about this a number of times, to panic slowly. You have to deal with the situation that you face, and I did start on the day that we stopped our first flying to Shanghai, and then 6 weeks later the entire airline was effectively shut down. We had periods where we opened it, periods where we paused, periods when we were only open to Australia, and that went on for actually over 2 years. And then, of course, the mad rush to then open everything, and everyone's experienced that. Have you got enough pilots? Do you have enough engineers? Do you have enough cabin crew? Can you get parts? And of course, no sooner have we sort of got on top of that, but we've had the joys of, first of all, the Trent engine on the Rolls-Royce, still dealing with that. That's been an issue since 2017. And then, of course, we made a decision some time ago on our A321s, the new engine option would be the Pratt & Whitney 1100. And of course, we've had some challenges with that. So, you work your way through those, requires a degree of grit, resilience. As I often say to the team, one of the things that we focus on is making sure we make good decisions, no dumb ones, and think about what this has to do, what the business is going to look like in 5 to 10 years. Let's make sure we set it up for success.
What were some of the decisions that you had to make to get Air New Zealand out the other side of COVID?
Well, one of the things that we've had to do first off was to recapitalise the airline. We were burning a lot of cash, and, this is an expensive payroll to operate. So in order to do that, we had to get hold of some loans. We had to take a reasonable amount of debt on, and the government provided that, but I would say at a pretty significant interest rate, to give us time to then get on and do a equity and debt raise, which we did. So that was a pretty big decision. Other big decisions were deciding what we would do with fleet, how we would take that. And of course, some of these things are easier in hindsight. So, initially we actually delayed the Boeing order for a year. Sort of wish we hadn't done that now, because we're now about 5 years late on getting the Boeing planes. But we made that decision, exiting out of the 777-200s. We've often reflected on that. We've been short on fleet. Should we have kept the 777-200s? Actually, our view on that is we made the right call. And the reason for that is increasingly difficult to maintain those engines and increasingly difficult to get parts for the interior of the plane. So we've had to make a number of those decisions, but I'm really proud of the way the business has got on and controlled the things that we could control.
Benefit of hindsight, is there anything you would have done differently during COVID?
Yeah, sure. And I've written these down because you never know when you're faced with this situation again. I would say to you that generally, instead of taking cost out, you're probably better to burn more cash. And that's because I think all of us had never experienced what it was like to shut down an airline, and nor had we experienced what it was like to start one up. And my learnings on that is that it's a lot easier to shut it down than to start it up. So some of these roles where we took headcount down, I just wouldn't do that. For example, call centres. For example, engineers. Now, we were lucky with our pilots that we were able to operate a furlough scheme, but there are areas in the business where the capability of the people is difficult to get and attain, and we would have been better holding on to that and burning a bit more cash. Number two, understanding that we weren't the only ones in this ecosystem and that other people in the supply chain or OEMs were going to have difficulty, so making sure that you got in early to ensure you got the fleet that you wanted early. They would be two that come to mind.
Contrary-wise, what would you think is the best thing that Air New Zealand did to get through COVID?
We've got on and done things that we could control. So, for example, pretty much our digital suite of products have either been upgraded or in the process of being upgraded. So the things that we could control, I had said to the organisation, get ourselves organised, get the people that we need, here's the capital or the expense, get on and do these things, because you'll never get a better time to re-platform your app, to re-platform your loyalty system, to put in a paperless flight deck, to reorganise how you do catering, to come up with a new disrupt solution, and on it goes. So, 95% of our digital estate is now in the cloud. We have 2,500 people using AI. And as well as that, we've spent probably the best part of 100 million in the last 2 years updating our ground service equipment. We're almost completed a brand new hangar for $170 million here in Auckland. We've got another hangar extension underway. We've invested $150 million on expanding our engine facility, which is a joint venture with Pratt & Whitney. So we've really thought about how we want to set this business up to win in the future. And for those things that we can control, we've just gone on and done it. For the other things, I think we've done a good job managing around them.
Now, how are things looking for Air New Zealand at the moment? Because you did mention before the problems with the Pratt & Whitney and the Rolls-Royce engines and, of course, the delays at Boeing. Can you give us a sense of how those are resolving and how things are looking in general?
Yeah, I would say to you that I am increasingly optimistic. And that's because what I can see is that we've hit the bottom of the cycle in terms of where we're at in Pratt & Whitney, for example. So we've currently got 6 aircraft on ground because I haven't got Pratt & Whitney gear turbofan engines. That soon goes down to 5 to 4 to 3 to 2 progressively. And that's going to get a lot of seats back in the air flying. A lot of customers are then going to be able to experience, the A321s, and it's going to allow us to get back on some new routes. In terms of Boeing, we're just about to get on the production line for the first 2 787-9s. So we've got line fit numbers. We're expecting those planes to be delivered March, April next year. So in the next few months, they'll actually physically start building those planes. Now, we've got an order for another 6 after those 2, and they'll flow through over the next 2 to 3 years. The one that I'm still wrestling with is Rolls-Royce. When I talk to Rolls, they're very comfortable that they are starting to see some progress. I'm less comfortable that I can see the light at the end of the tunnel that gives me confidence that the 4 to 5 aircraft on ground I'm currently experiencing on the 787 starts to reduce incrementally. But I don't think it gets worse. And I'm hoping that over the next few months, just like I've seen with Pratt & Whitney, Rolls-Royce turn the corner and we start to get some engines back.
Now, looking back on a personal note, airline CEOs, of course, famously humble and modest people. What kind of mark would you give yourself as you look back on your tenure?
Look, I would say to you that I'd score myself, a 7 out of 10. There are plenty of things that I've learnt in this particular role that, as I mentioned, a couple that I would do differently next time. But overall, I think the business is in good shape, and part of my legacy is not just leaving the business with some good physical assets like the one that's behind us, which we'll jump on in a minute, or getting some new planes delivered. It's creating the culture in the business and the sense of growth and winning that this business is left in good shape, not just for the next year or 3 years, but for the next 10 or 20 years. And, when my time comes to an end at the end of October, I know that that's exactly what I will have done.
And what's next for you after October? I presume you're not following your predecessor into the Prime Minister's office.
I don't have any idea what I'll do next. I don't intend to retire. But there will be things that will work their way through over the next few months. I don't know what they will be, but I certainly have plenty of energy for another challenge. This has been an incredible experience. It will have been 6 years by the time that I move out. And I'm cognizant that, one of the things that chief executives do is set the business up for success and to make sure that at a point in time you do hand the baton and the relay over for the next person. And now's about the right time to do that.
Right. Well, thank you, Greg Foran. We have got to get ready to board this plane, but thank you all for tuning into the Australian Aviation Podcast, this very special episode on location at Auckland Airport. I'm Jake Nelson. We will see you next time.
Okay, welcome back. So, God willing, that all worked. And in the second part of the show, you got to hear from Jake interviewing Greg Foran. What did you think of it? What was he like to meet? How did he come across? Again, it's unusual to get that much time with the CEO of a major airline. I mean, also because he's an outgoing CEO, so he can be a little bit more candid. And he is a CEO that joined just before COVID started. What was he like? How did you find it?
It was quite personable. And, he had a lot of good insights about what things were like for Air New Zealand during COVID, the decisions that they made, what he in hindsight would have done differently. We got some insight into how that Dreamliner was refitted and how the rest of them are going. So that one took 180 days or more. Now that they know how to do it, and now that sort of the certification process has been done for the first one, and they can presumably get that all squared away a lot quicker. It should be maybe 40 to 60 days. I think for the remainder, and so there should be more arriving by the end of the year. I think the second one's being retrofitted now, but so that's what he gave us about the Dreamliner. He also mentioned, by the way, the situation with the supply chain issues and the maintenance issues that Air New Zealand has been having, because they've sort of been hit by a perfect storm as in terms of what their suppliers. The problems that they've been having with their suppliers. They were unlucky enough to have picked Pratt & Whitney for the engine option on the A320s and A320neos, and Rolls-Royce for the Dreamliner engines. And both of those companies have had maintenance issues with those engines. And couple that with the ongoing issues and delays with Boeing around their new Dreamliners with the Skynest sleeping pods that are now not arriving until next year. They've had a pretty rough go of it. But Greg Foran told me, and he told the other reporters that were there as well, there was a sort of a chat beforehand, before we got to sit down with him for that interview. And as you heard in that interview, it's sort of there's light at the end of the tunnel as far as Pratt and Whitney is concerned. He thinks that they're sort of at the bottom of that cycle, and they'll be able to climb out of it and get those engines back up and running and get those planes back up in the air that have been affected by these engine problems. So fingers crossed they can get that sorted out. He says he's less confident about Rolls-Royce, but
why is he less confident about that? The British always deliver.
He's less confident about Rolls-Royce, but he's hoping to see he's hoping to see a turner corned there, a corner turned there, so that they start to get some engines back for the 787s. So fingers crossed on both of those counts, and fingers crossed they can get some of those Dreamliners back.
And you're in a really unique position because, like Australia, it's a country that just relies on aviation. Obviously, you've got a North and a South Island. You also got a country that needs to connect with Australia a lot as well. And you effectively have one national airline that was very badly affected by COVID. I think it was 30 or 40% of their total staff they had to let go at the beginning.
There was quite a lot.
Yeah, it was quite a lot. It's very, very hard. I know, as he said in the interview, it's very hard to kind of... It's easy to shut a airline down, I think he might have said, but it's harder to kind of restart it up. But at the point in time when Air New Zealand were cutting staff, they were never to know how long COVID would go on for. They had to make these kind of snap decisions. And there's an element with all airlines, they had to cut a little bit more maybe than they thought. They didn't really have much choice. They've also had the issue that they were effectively given a monster bailout by the government. I think the government bought like 50% of Air New Zealand or something like that. So that obviously then brings in, suddenly the government have a lot more say in that. You also have the issue that New Zealand probably next to China was the country that was shut down the longest. And that's understandable because New Zealand, for a long time, their kind of lockdown policy or their kind of border closures seemed to work. But nonetheless, if you're operating an airline that the country needs, it's an almost impossible situation to deal with. So credit to Greg Foran to being thrown in the deepest of deep ends and having to make that call and sort of resuscitating the airline. He may have only have been there like 5 years or so, which is still quite a long time, but he's, an extraordinary sort of part of history.
And, as he said in the interview, he said that he'd score himself maybe a 7 out of 10.
Oh, decent modest. Kiwi, I like that. I think if it was Aussie, he'd be like 9 out of 10.
Yeah, well, he said that, there were, as you heard, he said that there were things that he learned, that he would do differently next time, but the business in good shape. And he wants to leave the business with, some good physical assets and as well to sort of to have reshaped the culture in the business. So, wherever he goes next, he did say he's not retiring or going into politics, so we probably won't see him succeed Christopher Luxon as Prime Minister of New Zealand, as well as CEO of Air New Zealand. But it'll be interesting to see what he does next. And, again, thank you to Air New Zealand for flying us out there. There should be some content, actually, that we're putting up from the plane and from the trip over, where you can see and walk through the plane and see what the business class seat looks like, the business premier seat. That I flew across in. Very, very nice seat.
Yeah.
Very nice seat, very nice plane.
Yeah.
The plane that I went over to New Zealand on was the A321neo in economy class, which was nice enough, but
an insightful piece of investigative journalism. He tries out business. Absolutely extraordinary hypocrite. Right, let's move on from that.
That's I will say a lot better than the economy class seat on Qantas on the way back from Brisbane to Sydney.
Qantas, if you did want to fly in business, apparently.
I've got no. The issue is that a lot of, and as we know as we've established it, a lot of the Qantas 737-800 fleet is a lot older.
Yeah.
It's getting a bit long in the tooth, and they are refitting their 737-800s, or some of the newer ones anyway, to match the interiors of the new A321 XLRs that they're bringing over.
Yeah.
That first one should be arriving soon. So hopefully the economy class experience in Qantas is improved when those new refits come in. But you've flown Qantas, Adam.
Yeah.
In economy.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's fine.
As long as you're not sat next to Ben, it's okay.
Look, economy class in Qantas is fine. It's Qantas. It's still a premium carrier, but some of those interiors are getting a bit clapped out.
Yeah. Right, okay, let's move on. Let's talk about some actual news. It's also been another one of those quietish news weeks. So what are you going to talk about next?
This is something that you covered, Adam.
Why did you do that? I don't want to talk about this stuff. What?
We were talking about Qantas, and we should probably cover the ongoing wranglings over the the fine that Qantas might have to face for the illegal outsourcing.
Yeah, so I've got to be very careful how I talk about this because this is an ongoing court case. So you've got to be very delicate with this. And I'm sure that there may have been things that have developed subsequently to this coming out. But for those people that are unaware, in 2020, Qantas effectively outsourced 1,700 or 1,800, depending on how you look at it, kind of mostly ground handling roles. So rather than those jobs being done within Qantas, they went to kind of third-party companies. Now, Qantas argue they had to do this because doing this would save them, I think they estimated like $100 million a year, and they had to make that decision during COVID. So back then, I think it was the latter part of 2020. They didn't know how long COVID was going to go on for, so they made this decision. The TWU in particular, the big transport union, were absolutely furious. And what they effectively insinuated is that Qantas did this not necessarily to save money, but they necessarily did this to kind of get out of the enterprise kind of bargaining agreements that they'd agreed over the years. This case went back and forth through the courts for years and years and years and years and years. I don't perfectly understand the Australian court system, but it went all the way up the courts. And then when they were eventually found to effectively have acted illegally, Qantas then argued the compensation amount, and that went all the way through the legal system. It was only until late last year, I think it was October, November, that finally Qantas agreed, or were forced to, however you want to look at it, set up a compensation fund of $120 million that would be used to help compensate some of these people that lost their jobs or had their roles changed. So it rumbled on for a very, very long time. So this week, as we record this, they are in the federal court again, but this time to decide the penalty that they will be charged for breaking the law. So this would be on top of the compensation amount. Now, perhaps the most extraordinary thing that happened is that we had Qantas chief people officer, which, Jake, you can tell me who that is right now?
That is Catherine Walsh.
Good work. So Catherine Walsh basically took to the stands, really. And credit to her, because we don't know, she doesn't necessarily represent the whole of this saga, but she gave quite a sincere, or I would argue a sincere, public apology. So he said, we are deeply sorry for what was happened. We understand it was wrong. And she also effectively said, we know the fact that this has lingered on for so long has been very difficult for our former employees. Now, that was effectively the kind of biggest public apology we had. We had a kind of, it was an apology, it wasn't an apology. At the end of last year, we had Vanessa Hudson say something, we sincerely apologise to those people impacted, which is a vile word, impacted by this decision. But this was a much fuller apology. Now, what happened during this case is that the judge chose his words very carefully. I think it was Justice Lee. And he kind of insinuated, or he said that he doubted the sincerity of this apology, because what he effectively said is, Qantas have gone there and said, we're really sorry, at the point in which they're going to decide the fine. But if they were really sorry, why did they let this thing go on for years and years and years and years and years? So the TWU's argument now is that they should be fined the maximum amount for $121 million. They argue it is basically the biggest ever example of a company in Australia doing this. They want Qantas to be punished, and they also want to kind of lay down a marker to stop other companies trying to do the same thing. It's kind of interesting watching this happen, because obviously I was at Australian Aviation when this broke, and I remember the moment, or I remember the kind of the morning when we were all in working from home, just out of lockdown. I remember getting that email from Qantas. I think I choked on the tea, because they made an awful lot of people redundant earlier in the year, and we kind of thought that was it. And then suddenly this other sort of 1,700 come about. The TWU right then were absolutely livid. Of course, the argument is with outsourcing. Obviously, Qantas would say it saves them money and that this is the way of the world. The argument is that it's kind of morally wrong that you take away roles, those roles then appear at another company, but at the other company, they may potentially earn less or have worse perks. They would say that that's wrong. The TWU's argument was also that the entire point of JobKeeper and JobSeeker, for those of you who remember those dark days, was the government's kind of initiative to pay companies to keep on workers. The whole point of doing that was to stop people getting made redundant so that when the world came back to normal, they keep their staff. So they were furious, effectively, that Qantas had made this decision. I would say whatever the rights and wrongs of it, 4 years, 5 years, whatever it's been now, is a hell of a long time to wait for this compensation. It's a hell of a long time. You do feel for these workers that were already terrified mid-COVID. They've had their roles outsourced. This whole thing has dragged on far, far, far too long. Another thing that's come out of a court case, or another point that was raised, is that Qantas effectively sent their chief people officer into how to have to defend the company rather than Vanessa Hudgens himself. Vanessa Hudgens? No, I'm not.
Vanessa Hudson.
Yeah, Hudson, not Hudgens.
I think Vanessa Hudgens is a singer.
Yeah, she was the one in what was that show? What was
High
it?
School Musical?
Yeah. I'm no.
Listen, I'd love to see Vanessa Hudgens testify for Qantas.
Yeah, so would I. Nonsense. But basically, the argument is, why did they send in a senior person, but someone far junior to Vanessa, to go and take the stands rather than the CEO? Though, of course, you could make the argument that these decisions were made under the rule of the maestro, Alan Joyce, and are nothing really to do with the kind of current regime. And so perhaps that's why they're apologising, because different set of people.
Yeah, I think that Qantas would definitely be wanting to draw a line under all of that. But also the point was raised, the barrister for the TWU, and this was reported in The Australian, Noel Hutley, pointed out quite reasonably that Catherine Walsh had nothing to do. She joined Qantas in February 2024, years after that whole outsourcing thing happened. And he said, Your Honour will have noticed every time I cross-examined her about a particular event, she said, well, I wasn't there, I can't speak to that. And he said she was put forward by Qantas as speaking on behalf of Qantas, but one would have thought if you were truly contrite, you would put someone in the witness box who was there at the relevant time, who could say, I was part of the organisation when this decision was made, and it's now changed its tune. So, Catherine Walsh... sending the head of HR seems like a reasonable thing to do, but Catherine Walsh was not even at Qantas at the time the decision was made, so it's sort of an odd thing.
It does look from the outside slightly something of it would seem to be something of a cowardly move that you sent this person into the firing line. Look, the reason that they chose her, one, because she could speak on culture. Generally speaking, the person I would say who's effectively your head of HR is the person that's going to be the most it's going to handle these situations the best. It's going to understand the lay of the land a little bit good. So I can see why they would have picked her, but nonetheless, you've got to say that you've got both the essentially the prosecution of the barrister for the TW, and you've got the judge himself kind of doubting the sincerity of that. So it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out.
And I think it was as well. Sorry, Noel Hutley, who was pointing out, not Justice Lee, that the apology seemed insincere because it was so long.
Yes.
So it was Hutley and not the barrister for the TW, not the judge himself. The judge was asking about a different thing. He did say that basically what he was saying was that he said, were you aware that as of March 24, at the time when you were deeply very sorry for the workers and the impact to employees, that was the primary case being advanced by Qantas in court. In that the case that they were advancing was that the workers should not receive compensation because of some logical counterfactual or another, which I don't quite recall, but that the workers would otherwise have gotten nothing. So so that's a bit of clarification there, but it's not a good look for Qantas at a time when they really need some good looks.
Yeah, and I think as well, you've obviously had, whatever the pros and cons of Joyce was, you could argue that financially he was very successful. They have had the new chairman and the new chief executive of obviously kind of their main mission now is to kind of resuscitate Qantas' reputation. And the last thing they want is these kind of skeletons from the past being dragged up and dragged up and dragged up again. Because Qantas need to make it clear they've had a fresh start. They have done a good job in terms of improving their kind of customer experience, in terms of improving delays and cancellations and stuff. I do think that Vanessa does seem to be very, very on the ball with this. One of the things I do like about the new CEO is that in a sense, she's the opposite of Joyce. She doesn't do many interviews. She's not a big public performer. She's the sort of person that keeps her head down and does the nitty-gritty really well, which is probably what they want. Right, what are we going to talk about next? What's up next?
While we're on the subject of Qantas, we've had from the ACCC, Qantas and Virgin have really financially benefited from the lack of competition since Rex's exit from the domestic sphere and since Bonza's collapse last year. This was from the ACCC in the quarterly domestic sort of airline monitoring report that they have released. But there's been strong ongoing demand for flights and limited competition on domestic routes, and those have contributed to these strong financial results for Qantas Group and Virgin Australia in the first half of the year. So, in the first 6 months of the financial year, Qantas posted pre-tax earnings of around $1.5 billion. More than $900 million of that came from Qantas and Jetstar domestic operations. Qantas domestic was the lion's share of that, $647 million. And it is noted here that Qantas captured 80% of the corporate travel market. So, like, if there is a corporate traveller 4 in 5 times in the country, they will be flying with Qantas.
And that's really interesting. Sorry to interject there. That's really interesting because when Virgin went into administration way back in 2020, Qantas were kind of aggressively courting those business travellers. They were aggressively going to those companies and saying, hey, do you necessarily trust a reborn Virgin Australia with your money? You might as well be safe and come with Qantas. So that decision has very much paid off. They now effectively own the whole business travel market now.
And as an aside, another incentive to fly with Qantas, and it's creeping back in, the Chairman's Lounge. Because if you I believe it's been said or established that if your company signs a travel contract with Qantas, or if your company agrees to do its corporate travel with Qantas, the boss gets an invite to the Chairman's Lounge. I don't know if it's for all companies or for just major companies or what, but I believe that's the policy. And if the company then switches its travel arrangements to Virgin, suddenly the Chairman's Lounge card no longer works. So the Chairman's Lounge is a powerful incentive, not just in the political but also in the business world, to keep your money with Qantas. Now, Virgin has its equivalent, the Beyond Lounges, which are also invitation only, but they're not as well populated as the Chairman's Lounge. And also, I think there was a bit of cost cutting that went on at the Beyond Lounges during the administration.
Wouldn't be up to your standards, would it?
I've never been inside the Chairman's Lounge, Adam, and I never will. But the Beyond Lounges, I think there was some cost cutting that went on because they were, costing the company huge amounts of money. And I think when Jane Hurdle came in, she, gave a lot of that stuff, that the really, really fancy stuff in there, the flick. But Qantas has sort of kept up the much fancier and more exclusive atmosphere of the Chairman's Lounge. So that's one thing that's one thing that's happened, is that Qantas has this massive, overwhelming share of the corporate travel market. Another thing, of course, is that Jetstar is once again the only low-cost carrier in Australia. Bonza gave it a go. They collapsed. Tiger Air before that, which was controlled by Virgin for a while. That went in 2020. So Jetstar once again has no competition for low-cost airfares in Australia. And so they've got, more market share, higher margins. Between them, Qantas and Jetstar account for more than 60% of passengers. Now, Virgin holds 34.4% of the domestic passenger market as of March, and that is following the end of the domestic operations by Rex last year. So low competition has once again put all the chips back into the pots of the two major carriers.
Yeah, and one of the issues as well...
Or the two major groups.
To be very clear, I'm in no way suggesting there's collusion between Virgin or Qantas or anything like that.
Absolutely
I'm not suggesting that. But what the situation we had previously, prior to kind of Virgin going into administration, is that you had Virgin Blue turn into Virgin Australia, and you had what was known in the industry as the capacity wars, which is a very aggressive competition between the two airlines to be the main full-service carrier. Qantas obviously thrashed Virgin. Virgin was losing a terrifying amount of money each year, and then obviously clapped into administration and had to kind of rebirth itself almost. When Virgin has re-emerged, its strategy is a kind of a mid-market carrier. So its idea is that it's not budget, but then it's not necessarily quite trying to be Qantas. It's somewhere in the middle. One of the things they've done very well is they focused on reliability. You get a tea and coffee on board. You can pay for food, et cetera, et cetera. But there's an element that...
And they do have business class seats.
Exactly. They do have business class seats. But there's an element that now Virgin's strategy is almost... I say it's not to compete with Qantas, but rather than aggressively chasing market share, its view is kind of like, we'll do our thing, Qantas can do Qantas's thing, and there's almost a little bit like we're going to stay out of their way. There's no... I think maybe it was a quote from Paul Scurra that said something on the lines of, chasing market share doesn't necessarily work. You need to chase profits. So they have their own strategy. So to an extent, Qantas almost doesn't really have a rival. You could argue Qantas is the only full-service proper airline. You could argue that Virgin is now the only mid-market, and you could argue now Jetstar is obviously the only budget airline. So even though we do have two carriers or two airline groups, we don't really have that competition. Now, for all of their many faults, particularly Rex were very aggressive at competing, and they were very aggressive at going into routes they thought Qantas was charging too much on, and trying to offer an alternative. Even Bonza, I know they were doing their own thing, but nonetheless, there was still another option. Maybe they weren't necessarily flying the same routes as Qantas or Virgin, but it may have been...
there was competition with Jetstar.
Yeah, there was some Jetstar.
Some competition.
But also, it's kind of like, if you're having a holiday with the family, maybe you will choose a Bonza route rather than a Virgin or Qantas route.
Particularly if Bonza is the only one flying to that airport.
Exactly. So having 2 extra carriers, even if they were only relatively small in comparison, did make an enormous difference. One of the things the ACCC has said time and time again, if you want lower airfares, you need competition. And when you saw those smaller airlines move into their routes, you would see an almost immediate drop in prices. It just kind of happened. So long term, we do have this problem that we've only got effectively two airlines, and we have no hope really in the near future of seeing anyone come in to compete. And a lot of that is because everyone would have watched Bonza and Rex fail as spectacularly as they did trying to do this. So it's hard to imagine in the near future anyone coming in. But again, it's that kind of long-term problem. There's also an element as well that when fares were particularly high a couple of years ago, and I think it was Alan Joyce that said, as we introduce capacity, then prices will go down. As more seats come into the market, you will naturally see prices going down. There's an element that's nonsense because they decide the prices. If they want to put them down, they can. They don't necessarily have to make, however many billions dollars worth of profit. They don't necessarily have to have the revenues they have. So there's an element here that everyone's going, it's terrible. They are still ultimately profiting from this. And that to me seems like the ACCC's point is that actually these two established airlines, particularly Qantas, are doing very, very well out of this.
Yeah, they are. And so it's something that's going to be that we'll need to keep an eye on, and see if anyone again tries to step up and challenge the big two. I don't anticipate for the next couple of years at least, but hey, maybe someone in the future. Maybe if the government nationalizes Rex, someone in the transport department will hit their head and decide that trying to compete on the Golden Triangle is a good idea again. They probably won't, but it might happen.
It would be good though if they did.
It's a non-zero chance.
If there's obviously a lack of pilots, there's a lack of aircraft. Maybe we could bring Rex back into domestic flying. I know one guy who is happy to be
and
captain.
Hey, they can train dogs to fly planes now.
Yeah.
So it's actually we just back on New Zealand for a moment. We were discussing as we were saying, New Zealand only has the one major airline. I mean, it's got Jetstar as well over there that's flying some routes I think domestically, but mainly it's just Air New Zealand. And I was discussing I was talking with the people at Air New Zealand while I was over there. What would you call if a Bonza equivalent started up in New Zealand? What would you call it? Like Sweet As Airways or something.
Can you do a Kiwi accent? I imagine that's on your roster of voice. They want a viral moment. But there you go. I'm teeing you up now. And also say something relevant to that conversation. In Kiwi, what do they call it? Kiwi? I don't know what they talk over there. Go on. Yeah,
you keep putting on the spot like this, Adam.
Go on.
I'd love to fly with Sweet As Airways. I'd love to fly with Sweet As Airways, bro. They got the budgie smugglers, eh? they got the budgie smugglers you can buy through the app.
Yeah, that's really good. Casey works in our office on HR leader. He's a Kiwi. We'll play this to him, see what he thinks. That was quite good though, to be fair.
Thank you. But yeah, so it's two markets that really don't have a lot of competition is Australia and New Zealand. We've got a lot in common. Yeah. But I think New Zealand is it's subtly different even to Australia.
Yeah.
So interesting to see what happens there. This is something that's been, called for ages and ages and ages and ages. And finally, after more than a decade, Qantas is bringing international flights back to Adelaide in its own right. So Adelaide Airport has not had regular scheduled Qantas flights since, I think, the mid-2010s. Used to have a Qantas service through to Singapore, but that got axed quite a while ago. And now Qantas has announced that it's going to be trying out a seasonal route from Adelaide to Auckland starting later this year. Now, these will be on 737-800s, and it will go from the 31st of October this year to the 3rd of May next year. First time it's flown internationally from Adelaide since 2013. Jetstar obviously has been flying from Adelaide to Bali for a while, but this is the first red-tail Qantas service that's going to be international from Adelaide. And that's something that the state government and the federal government have been kind of, needling Qantas to do for some time. Bring back your international services.
But the argument was also made that even if those services weren't to necessarily be that profitable, as the apparent national carrier, Qantas kind of has a duty to do these flights. And it's also quite absurd that a major state capital, which I think we can say Adelaide, a major state capital didn't have Qantas international flying. That does seem slightly ridiculous. So good to see that they're back now.
Yes, yeah, and Peter Malinauskas, the Premier of South Australia, will be very happy with that, and so I imagine will be the Transport Minister, Catherine King, and the people of Adelaide who might want to fly to Auckland directly without having to transfer through anywhere else. And hopefully, if this international Auckland service succeeds, then we might see more red-tail services by Qantas out of Adelaide to international destinations. At the moment, Emirates is flying into Adelaide, and so that's connecting Adelaide through Dubai, and they're going to be launching their new long-range A350s into Adelaide as their first international market outside of Dubai. So they're a code-share partner of Qantas, but we really need Qantas to be stepping up.
Have you been to Adelaide?
I've not been to Adelaide.
No.
You've been to Adelaide, and you've related a story about it a few times about a horrible experience in a hotel. You're not going to do it again.
I'm not going to. Well, he just slaps you down. Have you gone for a break? Don't tell that story again. Hey, I'm the boss. Just some respect. For God's sake. Just because I've got a toy dog.
I presume you're not telling that story again.
No, I'm not. But blimey. Right, we got time for one more story or whatever before we
on the subject of international, we've seen the biggest ever quarter for international travel at Sydney Airport.
Yeah.
So record high, 4.32 million international passengers in the first quarter of 2025. That's up 3.9% on the first quarter of 2024. Domestic and regional slightly down. But international travel by Australian passport holders up 7.5%. Also, South Korea, India, Philippines have been up since last year. In general, not specifically in this quarter, I think it was slightly down, but in general, travel between Japan and Australia has also been increasing over the past year or so.
Snow's good there, apparently.
And this is all coming as Sydney is redoing its terminals. They've got the enhanced security screening that's going in at the T1 International Terminal. I sort of saw a few of the renovations as I was going through the International Terminal there. And they're redoing Terminal 2. And so, hopefully Sydney is going to be able to better cope with all of this, extra demand that's being put on it, which is not going to really see any relief until Western Sydney opens in 2026.
Right. Probably about all the time we got. Why haven't you mentioned you bought up the present I got you for the birthday? You've not mentioned it yet.
Yeah, this is a copy of Adam very kindly got me Peter Kay's Phoenix Nights, which is a British sitcom that I presume is not about blokes in armor riding around the plains of Arizona.
Wow, no, it's not. So I don't like you've never watched Phoenix Nights, but it's a very British thing. I doubt it ever made it to Australia. If Lindsay were here, she's in the UK at the moment, she would love this, right? So it's this kind of legendary sitcom. Like you have like RSL clubs in Australia, right? So you could a similar thing in the UK with like working men's clubs or whatever. Not a little bit different to RSLs, but they were kind of like community kind of clubs. There'd be a bar, they maybe have some acts on. They were particularly big up north, and they were going for decades. And kind of come the 90s or the early noughties when this came out, these clubs were dying out. They were seen as really old-fashioned. And Brian Potter, the main character in Phoenix Nights, he was determined to keep these clubs alive. So he built this, he had this one club and somebody burnt it down. So he got another club and he called it the Phoenix Club. And it's just like, it's a combination of really dark.
And that sank into the swamp. But then they built a fourth club, and the fourth club stayed up.
That's actually kind of what happens. I won't ruin it for you. But basically, it's a combination of like really, really dry British humour and also kind of like silly puns and stuff. Like it's well up your street. I reckon you will love it. I reckon. We got it on DVD. Admittedly, no one's actually used a DVD in about 20 years, but Jake did assure me before I got it for you, he does have a DVD player, so we will be able to watch this.
Yes, and I will definitely have a look. There's been some discussion about the decline of like social clubs and things like that, particularly in America. This idea that like back in the mid 20th century or whatever, you had a lot more of an opportunity to build community groups in American, suburbs and towns. Like, you had the Union Hall, or you had the local Elks Club, or your local lodge or whatever. Or, if you're a member of a political party, then the political party would have would have dinners and things like that. And that's kind of all gone out the window, and that's kind of contributed to the sad atomization of American society, where nobody, where there's no community. There's no community anymore.
Right.
And so they need venues like this, and they need spaces like this.
Okay, bit tenuous. No, okay, right. Well, anyway, there we go. That's PK.
And speaking of the atomization of society, by the way,
go on.
Speaking of the atomization of society, there was a story in the Sydney Morning Herald the other day that apparently airlines are taking steps to ensure that they can keep flying even after the outbreak of a nuclear war.
What?
There's special insurance policies that are apparently being drawn up that would allow jets to continue to fly following a nuclear explosion.
I'm not getting on the plane.
Well, the current policies, according to the Herald, and I think this is reported from the Telegraph over in the UK.
Yeah.
But the current policies date back to the 50s, and they would force the grounding of every civil plane worldwide in the event of a single nuclear explosion.
Yeah.
Because the assumption back then was this would be nuclear Armageddon. The whole world would break out. But nowadays, apparently it's more likely that nuclear weapons would be these little tactical warheads in a limited battlefield role. So the airlines are looking to update their policies in the event of a nuclear war. And I'm going to say that. I don't like this.
No.
I don't like that they're having to consider this.
No.
It's bad that they're having to consider this.
It's bad we're going to consider that. And also, the last thing I want to do is be in an aircraft and just see like a nuclear missile whizzing past me. It's like, oh, where you going? Oh, I'm going to Ibiza for a week. Oh, you're not now because it's a mushroom cloud.
Well, now hang on. Look, I would say it would be a lot better to see a nuclear missile whizzing past you than to have a nuclear missile hit you.
Yes.
That would be way worse if that latter scenario happened. So I don't like that. That's bad.
Right. So we're ending the show talking about nuclear Armageddon and what would happen if you're seeing that in the air.
But I mean, you've got Soot, so
he's been really good actually. Very stressful few days, so he's been excellent. Right, we will wrap up the show. Say goodbye, Jake.
Goodbye, and hopefully we don't all perish in nuclear fire before next week.
Hopefully we won't. We will be back at the same time next week, but from now, from me, Jake, and Sir, goodbye.
Goodbye.
Bye.